David had traveled many worlds, but Thalara was different. As his shuttle descended through the violet clouds, he pressed his forehead against the glass and stared at the land below. The surface glowed with rivers of silver light, winding between mountains shaped like towers. The air shimmered with colors, and every valley seemed alive with crystal structures that reflected the twin suns. He was not a soldier, not a conqueror, not even an explorer in the usual sense. David was a diplomat, one of Earth's chosen representatives, sent to build bridges with new civilizations. This mission, however, was unusual. He was not here for a treaty or trade agreement. He was here because of a letter sealed with the royal crest of Thalara. The message had been short but clear. We invite a guest from Earth to witness the joining of two noble houses. Let him come in honor as a witness of peace. When David first read it, he laughed, thinking it a mistake. Why invite a human to a wedding on a planet where humans had only recently been seen? Yet his superiors on Earth believed it was a chance to build goodwill, so they chose him, known for his calm nature and respect for alien customs. Now, standing on the shuttle's ramp as the doors opened, he felt the weight of the moment. A line of armored guards awaited him, their tall frames glinting in the sunlight. Each carried a long, spear-like weapon, yet none pointed it toward him. Instead, they crossed the weapons in a gesture of welcome. "Honored guest of Earth," said one in a deep, resonant voice, "the kingdom of Thalara greets you. The king has commanded us to bring you to the palace." David nodded, keeping his movements respectful. He had read that Thalarans valued composure over enthusiasm. Excitement was seen as childish. Steadiness was seen as strength. As he followed them through the alien city, he marveled at its beauty. Towers carved from translucent stone rose into the sky. Bridges stretched between them like ribbons of glass. The people wore long, flowing robes decorated with threads that seemed to shine from within. Music drifted from the streets, not loud or chaotic, but smooth, flowing like water. Everywhere he walked, eyes turned to him. Some curious, some cautious. Humans were rare here, and David felt like every step was being measured. Yet he walked, with steady grace, remembering the advice he had given himself countless times. Show respect, show patience, and never assume you understand everything. At last, they reached the palace. It was carved into the side of a massive crystal mountain. Light shone through the walls, scattering rainbows across the marble steps. The guards led him inside, and there he saw the great hall. The hall was filled with nobles, each seated on long benches. The walls were lined with banners of deep red and gold. At the far end sat the king himself, a tall figure draped in robes of woven silver. His crown was not metal, but living branches of crystal, pulsing softly with light. His eyes, a piercing shade of blue, studied David with quiet interest. "You are the guest of Earth," the king said in a voice that carried through the hall without need of shouting. "You honor us with your presence." David bowed slightly. "It is I who am honored, Your Majesty. Earth is grateful for your invitation." The king's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile, but carried warmth. "You will sit among us as the wedding is prepared. You will eat at our tables and witness our ways. Watch carefully, human, for what you see here has never been seen by your people before." David inclined his head. "I will watch and learn." The king gestured, and servants guided David to a seat among the guests. Plates of food were set. Before him, fruits shaped like stars, breads that shimmered like polished stone, and cups of water that glowed faintly in the dim light. He tasted carefully, finding the flavors unlike anything from Earth. Sweet, sharp, and alive with energy. As he ate, the nobles whispered. Some glanced at him with interest, others with suspicion, but he paid them little mind. His attention was drawn to the music. A group of musicians played instruments that looked like crystal wings, and the sound filled the hall with harmony that seemed to touch the soul. Then came the dancers. Their robes swirled as they moved in circles, their steps precise and flowing. Each motion told a story, though David did not know the language. Still, he felt the weight of it, the history woven into their movements. For a moment, he forgot he was an outsider. He was simply part of the gathering, swept into the beauty of it all. When the performance ended, the king rose again. The union of my daughter with the house of Varun will be the dawn of a new age for Thalara. Tonight the feast begins. Tomorrow, the ceremony of vows will bind them. The hall erupted in cheers, voices echoing against the crystal walls. David clapped politely, though inside he felt a strange tension. The princess had not yet appeared. He wondered what she was like. As the night went on, servants refilled his cup, and nobles questioned him. They asked about Earth, about human customs, about wars and victories. Some laughed at human ways, others admired them. David answered calmly, never defensive, never boastful. He knew this was not the time to prove humanity's strength. This was a time to show humanity's heart. At last, the doors opened. The princess entered. David turned, and his breath caught. She was unlike the other Thalarans, where their features were sharp and angular. Hers carried a softer grace. Her long robe shimmered with threads of silver, and her crown of crystal flowers glowed faintly. She moved with dignity, but her eyes, deep green and bright with curiosity, swept across the room until they landed on him. For a moment their gazes locked. David looked away quickly, reminding himself that he was only a guest. Yet something told him that this single look would change everything. The hall grew quiet as she approached her father. The king placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Behold my daughter, Princess Alira, who tomorrow shall be wed." Applause filled the hall, but David heard none of it. His mind replayed the brief glance they had shared, a silent spark that refused to fade. He had come only to witness a wedding. He did not yet know that fate had written another role for him, one far greater than he could imagine. The morning sun rose over Thalara, its twin rays flooding the palace with golden light. David woke in a chamber prepared for him, the walls carved from crystal that shimmered faintly as if the room itself was alive. Servants had left fresh garments. On a stand, robes woven with silver and dark blue thread. He understood the meaning at once. Guests were expected to wear ceremonial clothing during the feast. After dressing, he followed a servant through winding halls until they reached the grand dining chamber. The room was vast, with high ceilings and tall windows that opened to the glowing valleys beyond. A long table stretched down the center, already filled with nobles and dignitaries. The air smelled of roasted fruits, spiced grains, and sweet wines that shimmered faintly like liquid light. As David entered, all eyes turned toward him. Some smiled with curiosity, others stared with measured coldness. He walked calmly, reminding himself not to appear overwhelmed. Respect and balance were his greatest tools here. The king rose from his seat at the head of the table. His crown caught the light like fire. "The guest of Earth has joined us," he announced. His voice carried authority, but also warmth. "He shall sit among us as friend and witness." David bowed. "Your Majesty honors me." A chair was prepared for him near the front, close enough to see the king clearly. He took his seat and soon found himself surrounded by nobles. They studied him as though he were another dish on the table. Some asked questions at once. "Is it true humans build ships of iron instead of living stone?" one asked. "Do your people truly breathe only one kind of air?" asked another. David answered patiently. "Yes, our ships are of metal. Yes, Our lungs hold only one type of breath, but we have learned to travel far, even to worlds like yours. A few laughed softly at his words, not cruelly but with disbelief. To them, humans seemed fragile. David did not mind. He had not come to boast. He had come to learn. Then the doors at the far end of the chamber opened, and silence fell. Princess Alira entered. Her robe today was deep green with golden threads woven into patterns of vines. A thin crown of crystal rested upon her hair, and her eyes carried the same bright curiosity as the night before. She moved with quiet strength, each step measured and graceful. The king rose again, lifting his hand. "Behold, my daughter, who tomorrow will join her life to the house of Varun. Let this feast honor her and the path she will walk." Applause thundered across the hall. Alira bowed slightly, her gaze sweeping across the table. When it reached David, she paused for a heartbeat. Then, with dignity, she took her seat beside her father. Servants began to carry dishes to the table. Platters of roasted roots shaped like spirals, bowls of shining berries that burst with flavor, and pitchers of golden drink that glowed faintly in the dim chamber. David tried each dish carefully. Some were sweet, others rich with spice. He noticed the nobles watched how he ate, curious if humans showed gratitude through food. So, he nodded gently after each taste, showing respect. The musicians began to play again, their instruments producing melodies that sounded like flowing water and distant thunder combined. Dancers followed, their robes moving like waves across the polished floor. Every motion was a story of old battles, victories, and peace. David clapped softly when they finished, though the rest of the hall roared with approval. He kept his expression calm, for to the Thalerans, too much display was seen as weakness. As the noise faded, Alira spoke for the first time that day. Her voice was clear, steady, and filled with quiet strength. "Our guest from Earth, you watch with patience. You eat with care. Tell me, do your people celebrate like this?" The hall grew silent. Nobles leaned closer, waiting to hear how the human would answer the princess herself. David bowed his head slightly. "We celebrate in many ways, Princess. On Earth, music and dance fill our gatherings. We share food, we laugh, we remember those who came before us. It is not the same as here, but the heart of it feels similar." Alira studied him, her green eyes thoughtful. "Then your people value memory and joy as well?" "Yes," David replied. "Without memory, we lose our past. Without joy, we lose our future." A murmur swept through the nobles. Some nodded with approval. Others whispered, clearly surprised that the human spoke with such balance. The king tapped the table, his eyes shining. "A good answer. You see, my counsel. This is why we welcome guests. Different voices carry wisdom we have not heard before." David inclined his head again, though inside he felt the weight of every word. One mistake could turn respect into ridicule, yet somehow he had spoken well. The banquet continued. Nobles debated matters of trade and territory, and David listened quietly. He did not interrupt, but when asked, he shared insights about how humans settled disputes. His stories were simple, but they carried the message of cooperation and endurance. The evening wore on. A group of young nobles began to test him with sharper questions. "Tell us, human," one said, leaning forward. "If your kind are so clever, why do you need allies at all? Why not rule the stars yourselves?" The words carried a challenge, almost a trap. The hall grew quiet again. David met the noble's gaze calmly. "Because strength without friendship brings only fear, and fear builds walls instead of bridges. Humanity has learned that to walk alone is to walk in darkness. To walk together is to walk in light." For a moment, silence stretched. Then the king laughed, a deep sound that echoed against the walls. "Well spoken. Perhaps Earth sends not only diplomats but teachers. Alira's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile but close. She seemed to approve of his answer, though she said nothing more. When the feast finally ended, the nobles rose and filed from the hall. The king dismissed them with a gesture, but before David left, the monarch spoke once more. "Tomorrow you will witness our vows, guest of Earth. Watch closely. What you see will bind houses, shape futures, and perhaps, if fate wills it, change more than you expect." David bowed deeply. "I will honor the moment, Majesty." As he left the hall, he could not shake the feeling of Alira's gaze on him. It was not hostile, not even cautious. It was searching, as though she wanted to understand who he truly was. He reminded himself again that he was only a guest. Yet, deep inside, a quiet thought whispered that his role in this wedding might not end with simple observation. Something larger was moving, something he could not yet see. The day of the wedding came with a clear sky. The twin sons of Thalara rose together, painting the mountains and crystal towers in gold and silver. Bells rang from the palace walls, deep tones that echoed through the valleys, calling nobles and citizens alike to witness the sacred vows. David dressed in the ceremonial robe that had been prepared for him. It was dark blue with silver bands running down the sleeves, and a sash marked with the royal crest rested across his chest. He understood the honor of wearing such clothing. To the Thalarans, it meant he was not only a guest, but a witness chosen by fate. When he entered the great hall, it was transformed. Long carpets of red and gold stretched from the doors to the throne. Flowers of crystal petals glowed softly along the walls. Musicians played slow, steady music, their tones rising and falling like the waves of a distant ocean. Hundreds of nobles filled the benches, their robes shining in every color of the kingdom. At the far end stood the king, tall and imposing. Beside him was his daughter, Princess Alira, wearing a gown of silver and emerald that caught every beam of light. She carried herself with grace, though David thought he saw a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. The ceremony began. Priests in white robes stepped forward, carrying bowls of shimmering water. They spoke in deep chants, their voices rising together until the whole hall seemed to vibrate with energy. Each chant marked the joining of two noble houses, the promise of unity and the blessing of the ancestors. David watched carefully, trying to understand. He knew his role was small: observe, show respect, and leave no insult. Every move mattered. Then came a moment that confused him. A priest approached and gestured toward him. "Guest of Earth," the priest said in a formal tone, "step forward and place your hand above the sacred cup, as witness and blessing." David hesitated. He looked around. Nobles watched with sharp eyes, waiting for him to act. The king's gaze was steady. Alira's expression unreadable. He thought it was a simple sign of respect, no different from lifting a glass during a toast on earth. So he stepped forward. The priest held out the silver cup, filled with glowing water. David raised his hand and placed it carefully above the rim, holding it there as though shielding the liquid. The hall erupted in gasps. David blinked, confused. The priest froze, eyes wide. Nobles began to whisper loudly. The king's face remained calm, but his eyes sharpened like blades. Alira's lips parted in shock. "What is this?" David asked softly, unsure of what had gone wrong. The priest turned to the king. "By sacred law, the gesture has been made. The hand above the cup is no blessing. It is the vow of marriage. The human has declared himself as her chosen, the Hall filled with voices, some angry, some stunned, some even laughing in disbelief. David's chest tightened. He had no idea what he had done. "Wait," he said, lifting his hand away. "I did not know." I thought it was only a custom for guests. But the priest shook his head. The vow cannot be undone once given. The cup recognizes the bond. The law is clear. Alira stood frozen, staring at him. Her eyes held no anger, only shock. Slowly, she looked at her father. The king raised his hand, and the hall fell silent. His voice was steady, but it carried, a weight that silenced even the loudest whispers. The law of vows is older than my crown. No one may break it. The human has spoken through action. By sacred right, he is bound to my daughter. David felt the world tilt. Your Majesty, I never meant disrespect. I had no knowledge of the law. Surely there must be a way. There is no way, the king said firmly. Law does not bend for ignorance. It binds all who stand beneath its weight. The nobles began to argue among themselves. Some shouted that it was an insult. Others said it was fate. A few even laughed, calling it a story for the ages. Alira finally spoke, her voice calm though her hands clenched at her sides. Father, if the vow is law, then it is done. But let it be known, this was not by choice. Her words struck David like a blade. He bowed his head, ashamed. He had not meant to dishonor her, yet now he had tied her future to his mistake. The king lifted his hand again. Silence. The bond is made. Yet before it is sealed, trials must prove its strength. No union is complete without them. The human will face the trials, as all must do. If he succeeds, the bond is confirmed. If he fails, the ancestors themselves will break what law cannot. David's heart pounded. Trials? He had no training for alien tests, yet he knew there was no choice. To refuse would bring shame not only on him, but on Earth itself. I accept, he said quietly, his voice steady, though his chest felt heavy. The king nodded. Then it is settled. The trials will begin at dawn. Until then, let the hall rest. The ceremony ended in confusion. Nobles left in groups, their voices buzzing with speculation. Some called it destiny. Others called it madness. David remained still for a moment, staring at the glowing cup, the symbol of his mistake. He had only meant to show respect. Instead, he had changed the course of his life. As he turned to leave, he caught sight of Alira. She looked at him briefly, her expression unreadable. There was no hatred in her eyes, only a sharp curiosity mixed with something else. Perhaps caution, perhaps wonder. David lowered his head in respect before walking away. He knew the trials awaited, and with them, the chance to either prove himself or lose everything. That night, alone in his chamber, he sat by the crystal window and looked at the stars. The silence of the room pressed heavily around him. He whispered to himself, I came only as a guest. Now I must stand as more. He closed his eyes, knowing dawn would come quickly, and with it, the beginning of trials that would test not his body alone, but his spirit. The palace was quiet after the ceremony, but the silence carried weight. Servants moved softly through the halls, avoiding David's eyes as though they feared being drawn into his fate. Everywhere he walked, whispers followed him. Some called him the mistaken groom. Others called him the chosen by law. David kept his head high. Inside, his thoughts wrestled with doubt and shame. He had meant no insult, yet his hand above the sacred cup had bound him to a future he did not understand. Tomorrow he would face trials meant for princes and warriors, and he was neither. A servant brought him to a chamber lit with crystal lanterns. Waiting inside was Princess Alira. She stood by the window, her figure outlined by the glow of the twin moons outside. Her emerald robe shimmered faintly in the pale light. David stopped at the door. He bowed as deeply as he could. Princess, I owe you an apology. My action was a mistake. I did not know your custom. I never wish to take from you the choice of your future." Alira turned slowly, her green eyes sharp. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then her voice came, calm but firm. "You speak honestly, that is clear, but honesty does not change law. What is done cannot be undone." David's chest tightened. "I understand. Still, if there is a way for me to lessen the burden this has placed on you, I will do it." Alira studied him. She stepped closer, her movements quiet but certain. "Most nobles fight to stand at my side. They see my name and the throne. Yet you, by mistake, have gained what others dream of. You could boast of destiny, but you bow instead. That is unusual." David met her gaze. "Because I respect you. To me, you are not a prize or throne. You are a person whose life should not be decided by accident." Her eyes softened slightly, though her voice remained steady. "Then you are unlike many I know. But words alone will not decide this bond. The trials will. They will test who you are, not what you claim." "I will face them," David said. "Not because I seek power, but because I will not let my mistake dishonor you or my people." Alira tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "We shall see." She turned back to the window. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow will demand more from you than any day of your life." David bowed again. "Thank you, Princess." As he left the chamber, he carried her words in his heart. There was no hatred in them, no rejection, only a sharp curiosity, as though she was waiting to see what kind of man fate had placed before her. That night, David found no sleep. He sat by the window of his chamber, watching the twin moons drift across the sky. His mind replayed the moment of the vow, the gasp of the crowd, the weight of the king's voice. Yet beneath all the fear, another thought rose. Perhaps this accident was not only a curse, perhaps it was a chance to prove what humanity was truly worth. At dawn, the palace bells rang again. Servants led David to the training court where the trials would begin. The space was wide, with tall crystal pillars rising like trees. Nobles filled the benches surrounding it, eager to watch the human face his fate. The king sat upon a high throne at the edge of the court. Alira stood beside him, her face calm, though her eyes never left David. The first trial was announced, a test of courage. Warriors stepped forward, carrying long staffs tipped with glowing crystals. David was handed a simple wooden staff. He was to face 3 challengers in combat, not to win through strength, but to stand without fear. The warriors circled him, their movements sharp and fast. David gripped his staff, his heart racing. He knew he could not overpower them, but he remembered his training as a diplomat, never meet force with force when balance could guide the way. When the first warrior struck, David stepped aside, letting the blow strike air. When the second charged, he used the staff not to strike, but to block and redirect. He moved with focus, refusing to show panic. The nobles whispered, surprised that the human did not crumble. Blow after blow came, but David held his ground. He was bruised, his arms ached, yet he refused to yield. When the third warrior at last stepped back, the priest declared, "The first trial is complete. The human has not broken." Applause rippled through the court. Some nobles clapped slowly, others with true respect. David lowered his staff, his chest heaving, but his spirit firm. The second trial was wisdom. A great puzzle of crystal was placed before him, its pieces glowing faintly. Nobles whispered that it was a test that even seasoned princes struggled with. David studied it carefully. He remembered how, as a boy, he had solved Earth's puzzles by patience rather than speed. Piece by piece he worked. Hours passed, yet he did not grow restless. He watched how the light shifted between the pieces, how one move opened paths for another. At last he placed the final piece. The crystal glowed brightly, filling the court with light. Gasps filled the air. Even the king leaned forward, eyes narrowing in approval. The priest raised his hands. The second trial is complete. The human has shown patience and clarity. Nobles whispered again, this time less with doubt and more with respect. Alira's eyes shone faintly, though her face remained calm. The third trial would come at sunset, a test of empathy. But already, David felt the shift in the air. He had walked into this court as a mistake. Now he stood as a man who had begun to prove himself. When the court emptied, David sat on a bench, exhausted yet steady. Alira approached, her steps quiet. "You did not fall," she said. "Not yet," David answered with a tired smile. For the first time, her lips curved into a small, true smile. Perhaps fate chose strangely, but not poorly. Her words gave him strength. Whatever awaited in the final trial, David knew he would not face it for himself alone. He would face it for Alira, for Earth, and for the bond that had been written in the light of a cup. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the crystal pillars of the palace court. The first two trials had tested David's courage and wisdom. His body was bruised, his arms sore, but his spirit remained unbroken. The nobles who once mocked him now studied him with caution, and some even with respect. The third trial began as the twin suns touched the horizon. The priest raised his staff and announced, "The trial of empathy will show whether the bond is forged from pride or from heart. The human must choose not with strength or cleverness, but with compassion." David stepped forward, his heart steady but uncertain. He had no idea what form this trial would take. From the side gates, 3 figures were led into the court. Each was Thalaran, but from different walks of life. One was an old man with tired eyes, his robe plain and worn. Another was a soldier with one arm bound in bandages. The last was a young servant girl, clearly nervous as she glanced around the crowded benches. The priest spoke again. "Before you stand 3 lives. You may offer aid to only one. The one you choose will be honored. The others will return in silence. Your choice will show what guides your heart." David felt the weight of the test immediately. It was not about puzzles or combat. It was about judgment, about what kind of man he was. He walked slowly to the old man first. The elder bowed his head and whispered, "I have served the kingdom all my years. My bones are weak, my time short. Choose me, and I will rest with honor." David nodded, then moved to the soldier. The warrior stood tall despite his wounds. His voice was firm. "I bled for this land. My arm may heal or it may not, but I have given myself to the crown. Choose me, and the court will see you value. Sacrifice." Finally, David knelt before the servant girl. She could barely meet his eyes. Her voice trembled as she said, "I am no one. My hands clean the halls. My life holds no glory. If you choose me, it will mean nothing to the nobles, but it will mean everything to me." David rose and stepped back. The court waited in silence. Nobles leaned forward, eager to see how the human would decide. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the silence guide him. He thought of Earth, of the times when power and honor blinded leaders to the needs of the small. He thought of his own people, who had risen not only through the strength of warriors or wisdom of elders, but through the lives of countless ordinary hands. When he opened his eyes, he spoke clearly. "I choose the servant girl." Gasps rippled through the court. Nobles exchanged shocked glances. Even the priest's eyes widened. The soldier frowned but bowed in respect. The old man lowered his head with quiet understanding. The servant girl covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. David continued. The kingdom already honors its warriors and its elders. But without the hands of the humble, no hall would shine, no table would be set, no kingdom would stand. Strength and wisdom matter, but so does the life of one who works unseen. If I am to be bound by vow, then let it be known I see value in all lives, not only those of glory. The court erupted in whispers. Some voices praised him, others muttered that he had chosen poorly. But when the noise settled, the king's deep voice carried across the chamber. A bold choice, a dangerous choice, yet one that speaks with truth. The trial is complete. The human has shown heart where many show pride. The priest raised his staff again. 3 trials have been given, 3 trials have been passed. The bond stands stronger. Applause broke out across part of the court, though not all joined. Some nobles frowned, clearly displeased. Yet Alira's eyes shone with something David had not seen before. Approval. After the trial ended, David was led to the garden to rest. The crystal trees glowed softly in the twilight, their branches swaying with a breeze that carried the scent of sweet blossoms. He sank onto a bench, exhausted but filled with quiet pride. He had survived combat without breaking. He had solved a puzzle meant for princes, and now he had chosen compassion over politics. As he sat, footsteps approached. Princess Alira stepped into the garden, her gown flowing like water in the dim light. "You chose the servant?" she said, her voice calm. David nodded. "I did. It felt right." She studied him for a moment. "Do you know what the nobles will say? They will whisper that you are foolish, that you do not understand our ways." "Perhaps," David answered, "but if I had chosen only to please them, then I would not be myself. I would only be another mask at their table. I cannot lead with lies." Alira's eyes softened, though her tone remained steady. "You are strange, human. Many who seek my hand care only for strength, for glory, for power. You are bound to me by mistake, yet you speak as though you would rather honor me than claim me." David smiled faintly. "Because honor matters more than claim." For a long moment, silence rested between them. Then Alira spoke again, more softly this time. "Perhaps fate is not blind after all." She turned and walked back toward the palace, leaving David with her words echoing in his heart. Later that night, as he returned to his chamber, he passed groups of nobles whispering in corners. Some looked at him with respect, others with cold suspicion. He knew the trials had not only tested him, they had changed how the court saw him. He was no longer only the outsider who made a mistake. He was a figure they would have to reckon with. But with respect came danger. Already he could sense the tension building. Not everyone wanted a human tied to the royal family. Not everyone would let this bond stand without challenge. As he lay down to rest, David whispered to himself, "I did not choose this path, but I will walk it. If I must prove myself again and again, then so be it. Earth did not send me here to hide." The night passed quietly, but the weight of coming days pressed on his chest. For while the trials had been passed, the greatest test was still to come, the acceptance of the kingdom itself. The morning light spilled across the palace, glinting off the crystal walls and floors. David walked through the halls with steady steps, his robes trailing lightly behind him. Since completing the trials, the court's atmosphere had changed. Some nobles gave him polite nods. Others whispered behind fans and pillars, clearly uneasy about a human who had proven himself in ways they had not expected. He was led to the garden, where Princess Alira was already waiting. Her presence was calm, her green eyes watching him carefully. For the first time, David felt that they were not only bound by mistake, but by shared understanding. "You have passed the trials," she said. "The court will respect you now. though some will never accept a human at this level. David nodded. I am aware. But respect is earned, and I will continue to earn it. Not for glory, but because it is right. Alira tilted her head, studying him. Most humans I have heard of are either conquerors or diplomats who speak with words and fear. You speak with action. That is unusual. I learned that words are only useful if backed by deeds, David replied. Without deeds, respect fades quickly. Alira's lips curved slightly, her first true smile toward him. Perhaps you are the kind of human I had heard about only in stories, one who chooses heart over pride, compassion over ambition. Their conversation was interrupted by a loud crash in the courtyard. Guards rushed forward, and a group of nobles stepped into the garden. Their robes were dark with gold trim, and their faces held cold amusement. Human, one of them said, stepping forward, you have survived our trials. Yet do you truly think you belong here? The princess is ours to choose, not yours by mistake. David straightened. I am not here to steal or claim. I am here because fate and law have placed me before her. I mean no disrespect to anyone. The noble sneered. Respect is earned with blood and power, not with words. Let us see if your heart will protect you when tested again. Before David could respond, Alira stepped between him and the nobles. Enough. You will not threaten him. Not here, not ever. If the law is clear, then it is the law, and I will defend it. The nobles hesitated, surprised by her strength. Few in the court had ever seen Alira confront challengers so directly. David noticed her calmness, her certainty, and felt a surge of admiration. She did not rely on laws alone. She relied on judgment and courage. You are brave, he said quietly, once the nobles had retreated. And you are not afraid, she replied. Many would have trembled before them, yet you stood tall. That earns more than the trials ever could. David looked at her, realizing that respect was forming between them, not forced by law, not compelled by circumstance, but slowly, quietly, by the choices they had each made. Over the next few days, David and Alira spent more time together. They walked through the crystal gardens, talked in the libraries filled with glowing texts, and observed the court's functions side by side. The princess shared stories of Thalara, its history, its victories, and its mistakes. David listened carefully, offering insights from Earth's past, not to lecture, but to compare, to learn, and to grow. One afternoon, as they walked along a path lined with luminescent flowers, Alira spoke softly. Do you understand what it means to be bound by law here, to be married to me? It is more than ceremony. It is responsibility to the kingdom. David nodded. I understand, and I will do everything in my power to honor that responsibility. I do not seek privilege. I seek to protect what is right. Alira studied him, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Many who claim to protect often serve only themselves. You speak with honesty. That is rare. As they spoke, a servant approached them with a message from the king. It was an invitation to witness a council meeting. The king wished to discuss the future alliances of the kingdom, and David's perspective as a human was requested. In the council chamber, David observed nobles and advisors debating fiercely. Some wished to expand Thalara's reach into nearby planets. Others argued for caution. David listened patiently. When given a chance to speak, he offered ideas of cooperation and shared knowledge. He explained that alliances built on trust and understanding were stronger than those built on fear or conquest. The council murmured in surprise. His words were not commands but guidance, yet they carried weight. Slowly, the room began to consider his suggestions seriously. Even some of the nobles who had opposed him nodded slightly. Alira's eyes met his across the chamber. She gave a small, approving smile. It was clear she recognized the impact of his perspective. That evening, back in the palace gardens, Alira turned to David. You have begun to change how some see you. Not all, but enough to shift the balance. David shook his head. I did. Not come here to change anyone. I came only to honor what was asked of me. But perhaps actions speak louder than words. She nodded thoughtfully. Indeed, you are not only surviving this world, you are shaping it. Over the following days, their bond grew stronger. Alira began to trust him not just as the human bound to her by mistake, but as someone whose choices reflected a rare courage. David, in turn, began to understand the depth of Thalara, the beauty, the strength, and the complexity of its people. Yet, shadows remained. Whispers in the hallways warned of nobles who still plotted against him, who could not accept a human at the heart of their kingdom. David knew he would face more challenges, not just in trials of strength or wisdom, but in navigating the delicate web of politics and envy. But for the first time since the vow, he felt hope. Alira's quiet trust, the respect he had earned through courage, and the chance to show humanity's worth gave him confidence. Whatever challenges awaited, he would face them, not as a guest, not as a mistake, but as a man whose choices had begun to matter. The sun set behind the crystal towers, and the garden glowed in the soft twilight. David and Alira walked side by side, silent yet connected. In that silence, understanding passed between them. The bond that had begun as accident was slowly becoming something more, an alliance of respect, courage, and shared purpose. The morning of the final ceremony dawned bright and clear. The palace was alive with activity. Citizens, nobles, and honored guests filled the halls and courtyards, all eager to witness the completion of the bond between Princess Alira and David. Flags fluttered in the gentle breeze, and the twin suns of Thalara shone brightly, casting the crystal towers in gold and silver. David stood in the chamber prepared for him. His robes were clean and polished, deep blue with silver patterns. The sash of honor rested across his chest. He had faced the trials, earned respect, and grown familiar with the ways of the kingdom, yet he could feel his heart beating with anticipation. Today was the day the bond would be witnessed by all. A servant led him through the halls. Nobles bowed or stepped aside as he passed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to cautious respect. Some whispered words of warning to one another, but David kept his focus. His attention was only on the princess and the ceremony ahead. At the entrance to the great hall, the king waited, regal and calm. Princess Alira stood beside him, her gown a shimmering silver and emerald, her crown of crystal catching the sunlight. Her gaze met David's. For a moment, neither spoke, yet in that silent exchange, understanding and respect passed between them. The hall itself was filled with the scent of glowing flowers, and crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting soft rainbows across the marble floor. Nobles and citizens alike watched, their voices hushed in anticipation. Musicians began to play a solemn melody that rose and fell like waves across the room. The king raised his hand. Today the bond shall be completed. What began as a gesture by accident has grown through trials, courage, and wisdom. This bond will not be broken, for it is strengthened by honor and choice. David stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Alira. He felt no fear now, only determination and respect. The past days had tested him, shaped him, and shown him the strength of both the kingdom and its people. The priest approached with the ceremonial cup, now glowing more brightly than before. Place your hand above the cup, he instructed. Speak the vow aloud, and let the bond be witnessed by all. David took a deep breath and lifted his hand. His eyes met Alira's. She gave a slight nod, her green eyes steady, full of quiet approval. I, David of Earth, he began, his voice clear and strong, accept this bond not as a duty alone, but as an honor. I pledge to respect, to protect, and to stand by Princess Alira, not for power, not for glory, but for the trust placed in me and the future we shall share." The hall was silent. Every eye was fixed on the human who spoke not only with courage, but with sincerity. Alira stepped forward, lifting her own hand above the cup. "I, Alira of Thalara," she said, her voice calm and certain, "accept this bond not as obligation, but as a choice. I recognize the courage, wisdom, and heart that David has shown. Together, we will face the future, honoring our people, our homes, and the trust placed in us." When their hands met above the cup, it glowed brightly, sending a warm light across the hall. The priest's voice rang clearly. "By the law of Thalara and by the choice of heart, this bond is complete. Let the kingdom witness the union." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Nobles who had once whispered in doubt now bowed in recognition. Citizens clapped and sang, their voices carrying across the palace grounds. Even those who had doubted the human's worth had to accept that he had proven himself beyond question. The king stepped forward, smiling. "Let all see that courage, wisdom, and compassion are not bound to one race or one world. A human has stood among us, and he has shown what it means to honor both law and heart." David lowered his hand from the cup and bowed respectfully to the king. Then he turned to Alira. "I will honor this bond," he said quietly, yet loud, enough for her to hear. "I will protect it, respect it, and uphold it in all things." Alira's lips curved in a faint smile. "And I will do the same," she replied. The ceremony concluded with the exchange of symbols. David received a ring of crystal, simple yet elegant, representing the unity of Earth and Thalara. Alira wore a matching ring, and together their hands glowed in the light, a visible sign of their bond. After the ceremony, the hall opened to the gardens. Music filled the air, dancers moved in harmony, and the people celebrated not only a marriage, but the joining of two worlds through courage and understanding. David walked beside Alira, not as a guest, not as a mistake, but as a partner. Their bond was recognized by all, and even those who had doubted him now looked with admiration. As the sun set behind the palace towers, David and Alira stood at the edge of the garden, looking out over the kingdom. The colors of the sky reflected in the crystal flowers, painting everything in gold, pink, and silver. "You have done more than survive, David," Alira said softly. "You have changed how this court sees the world. You have shown that a human can walk among us, not as outsider, but as equal." David smiled, a gentle warmth spreading through him. "And you have shown me the strength of your people, the wisdom of your ways, and the meaning of honor. I could not ask for more." She turned to him, her eyes bright with trust. "Then we will face the future together, not by accident, but by choice." David nodded. "By choice, and with respect for all we serve." The crowd in the gardens cheered again, and the palace filled with music and laughter. For the first time since he arrived on Thalara, David felt that he truly belonged, not as a visitor, not as a mistake, but as someone whose courage, wisdom, and heart had earned a place in the kingdom. As the night fell, the twin moons rose over the palace, their soft light reflecting in the crystal towers. David and Alira walked side by side, knowing that challenges would come, but confident that together they could face whatever the future held. The kingdom had witnessed a bond formed by fate, tested by trials, and strengthened by heart. And in that union, David realized that humanity's strength lay not only in cleverness or courage, but in the choices one made, even in the face of the unknown. For David and Alira, the journey had begun, not as guest and princess, not as mistake and Victim, but as partners, equals, and friends, ready to shape the future of Thalara and beyond.